Hello, everyone. This is your host, Susan Rosen, and I have a return guest today. I'm very excited to have on the program again, and his name is Glenn Livingston. And Glenn is actually a psychologist by training. I mean,
I
it's
am.
his education, Ph.D., I believe, right?
Mhm.
Um, and because of, actually, he can tell you his story better than I can, but his his book and what he's primarily been working on, although he can update me a little bit now too, is a book called Never Binge Again, which
Mhm.
I think all of us have had those kinds of issues at some time in our life. And so that's why we've got him back on the program again to talk about that and what he's been working on lately. And welcome back, Glenn.
Thank you, Susan. It's a delight to be here. It's a delight to be here. Do you want me to kind of summarize what we talked about last time, and then
Sure,
we can go in any direction you want to going further?
sure,
Yeah.
that sounds
Okay.
good.
Um, so long story short, I'm a formerly chubby psychologist who's now a not so chubby psychologist. And that took about 30 years to figure out what to do. I was very addicted to sugar and flour and chocolate. Oh my God, chocolate and pizza. And and it interfered with my career, it interfered with my marriage, it interfered with a lot of things. Um, and over the years, I tried just about every approach that there was, mostly the love yourself thin kind of approach, because I come from a family of therapists. And I found that for me, it was impossible to love myself then. I learned to love myself. It was a good journey to take, but I didn't love myself then. I always thought if I could
Mm.
fill the hole in my heart, then I wouldn't be filling the hole in my stomach. But then I learned that the part of the brain that really is responsible for overeating beyond our own best judgment, it doesn't really know love. It's more in the reptilian brain and the brainstem, and it's part of the emergency response system that says, when it sees something in the environment, do I eat it or do I mate with it or do I kill it? It's like a bad college drinking game. Um, and
Yeah.
I learned that the way to control it had to do with the upper brain, the part that says, before you eat, mate, or kill that thing, what impact is that going to have on the people that you love and your tribe? And what impact is it going to have on your long-term goals? I talked about a silly technique that I eventually developed, which I was never going to teach, but eventually wound up writing a book that has over 1 million copies in distribution called Never Binge Again, um, wherein I designated my reptilian brain as my inner pig. I should have called it something different, but this was not going to be for publication. This was just a thing. This was just a thing I was
Yeah.
doing
Yeah.
myself. I would call it my inner pig, and I'd make a very clear line that would say something like, "I'll never have chocolate on a weekday," because my binges always started with chocolate. They would progress to
Ah,
pizza and everything else, but they always started with chocolate. So one of my first rules was I would never have chocolate on a weekday. And that way I knew if I heard a little voice in my head that suggested I should have chocolate on a Wednesday, because you worked out hard enough, you could just start tomorrow and a little's not going to hurt. And all those
we
kind
all
of
know that. Yes.
justifications.
Yeah.
I would say, well, that's not me. That's my inner pig. Chocolate is pig slop on a Wednesday. I don't eat pig slop. I don't let farm animals tell me what to do. And it would wake me up at the moment of impulse and give me a chance to make the right decision. Um, Over time, I learned that what was actually happening was that the um, upper brain was writing, because I would write down what the pig was saying, and then I'd ask why it
Hmm.
was wrong. So I would engage in reasoning. I would say,
Hmm.
well, if you have a craving and you think I'll just start tomorrow, and then you indulge that craving, you're more likely to think I'll just start tomorrow, because you've reinforced the thought, and you're also
Yeah.
more likely to have the craving tomorrow. So it's never just as easy to start tomorrow. You always have to use the present moment to be healthy. And I would call that a rational disputation. When I would do that, what would actually happen is I was switching brains. I was taking myself out of that emergency response system, which is the seat of overeating, to my higher brain, the seat of reasoning. where I could rest and digest and think and strategize and make better choices. And it was not a miracle. It did not immediately erase all of my overeating. What it immediately erased was any sense of confusion and powerlessness. I didn't think I had this mysterious disease inside of me. I didn't think that there was some force I couldn't control. It was a lot less confusing and mystical. And it just was more like, okay, I've got this part of my body that wants stuff. And just like other parts of my body want stuff, my bladder wants to pee, my, reproductive organs want to kiss attractive people in the street. I
Right.
don't have to listen to that. I can be in control. And I learned to be in progressively more control, partially by um, writing down the reasons that my inner pig was telling me that I should eat pig
Mm.
slop, that I should break these lines and eat slop. Um, Partially by learning other ways to disempower that emergency response system, the
Mm.
sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, feast or famine. That's the part that's responsible for saying just hand over the chocolate and nobody gets hurt. Um, it feels like it's an emergency, and
Yeah.
big advertising, big food is all too happy to push those buttons and make you feel like it's urgent that you have their bags and boxes and containers. They're really taking advantage of this evolutionary bias. We could talk about that more if you want to.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
but I realized I had this perceived emergency and I had to tell my brain there was no emergency. So I asked around and I talked to some people and I did some reading. And Laurie Hammond, she's a hypnotist. I don't use hypnosis in my program, but
Uh,
she's a hypnotist.
uh-huh.
She told me about a type of breathing called 7-11 breathing, which
Oh,
means that you breathe out for longer than you breathe in. You breathe in for a
okay.
count of 7, you breathe out for a count of 11. If you do
Uh-huh.
that a couple of times, you're signaling to the brain that there's no emergency. Because if there was an emergency,
Uh,
you'd be going, like if a hungry
okay.
bear was chasing you,
Okay.
you wouldn't have time
Yeah.
to breathe out for longer. So
Right.
that was a way that you could deactivate the sympathetic nervous system, deactivate the emergency response system, and
Uh-huh.
activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which says this is
Okay.
time to rest and digest and strategize and think about long-term goals. And so I found that doing that helped a lot. Um, Keeping track of the rational disputations, all the different things that my pig said and why it was wrong. We can talk
Mm.
about them if you want
Mm-hmm.
to.
Uh-huh.
Um, Keeping track of that tended to help because I no longer had this greased chute that just felt okay to change my mind. And then the final thing that really helped was taking care of my body physically.
Mm.
Mostly that had to do with what I ate. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not just like I had this Nazi food policeman in my head that said, "You will not have chocolate," right?
Right.
I also said, "What do I authentically need? What is my
Mm-hmm.
body mistaking chocolate for?" And often it was genuine nutrition. Like I often found I could kill the chocolate craving if I had a kale banana or celery juice and banana smoothie.
Uh-huh.
I'm not a dietitian. I just kind of played around and that worked for me. Um,
Uh-huh.
and then as I started working with people, I discovered that just about every overeater is also a really good dieter. They go in these, roller coasters where there's an old nursery rhyme that says, when she was good, she was very, very good, but when she was bad, she was hard. And that's
Yep.
how most
Yep.
people who struggle with overeating eat. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so I kind of learned that you have to flood your body with nutrition on a regular, reliable basis. And that really dampens those urges.
Uh-huh.
So it was kind of a combination of things. And then understanding that rules were better than guidelines, because if you say, I'm going to just follow a guideline of eating in moderation, I'm going to eat healthy 90% of the time, but 10% of the time I'm going to indulge. It's really
Yeah.
good in theory, but you don't know which is the 10% and which is the 90%. So every
Mm.
time you're at Starbucks in front of a chocolate bar, you have to be thinking, well, is this the 10% or the 90%? You've got to make another food decision. And decisions wear down your willpower. One definition of
Mm-hmm.
willpower is the ability to make good decisions. And it turns out we can only make so many good decisions every day. So the more decisions
Huh.
you require yourself to make, the harder it is to stick to them. Um, So just kind of, I put that all together. And as I was getting
Yeah.
divorced, it became a system called Never Binge Again. And I published the book and it got famous relatively quickly. I mean, I was in marketing most of my life, so marketing and psychology, so I knew what to do, but it got famous
Uh,
really quickly. Um, and now people, they kind of sort of recognize me because they forget my name. They kind of point at
uh,
me and go, pig guy, you're the pig guy. So it's my claim to fame. What are you going to do? Um, so we talked a lot about that last time.
yeah.
And, I've written 6 books
Hmm.
since that point. So we could
Wow.
talk about any of them if you want to. We could talk about more about the step-by-step procedure that people want to go through if they want to stop
Mm.
overeating. Um, we can talk about specific triggers. What do you think would be most interesting to your audience?
Well, let's see. I don't, to be perfectly honest, they don't talk to me.
Your audience doesn't talk to you.
No, I
You guys,
don't know.
you have to talk to Susan. But leave her a comment on here. Tell her what you like or you don't like about this episode and any other.
Yeah,
Susan wants
yeah,
to hear from you.
yeah, exactly, exactly. And it is kind of funny because I've talked to other podcasters and they say a lot of the same thing. So, I think my take on it, we're getting off the subject, but my take on it is that I think a lot of people listen to podcasts when they're doing something else.
Well, it's a broadcast medium.
So,
It's a
yeah,
broadcast medium. Yeah. Yeah, that's
yeah.
okay.
So
That's okay.
so they don't sit down. No, no, so I'm it. It's like, what do I want? So
What
that makes it that much easier for me too. I'm trying to get out of the sun here. Um, so I think it um boy, that they're all so interesting. I'm having a really hard time here. Um, so why don't you first off tell me about a little bit about the 6 books that you've written
well,
since.
yeah. So what we found was that there were a lot of specialty topics that really needed a
Mm,
treatment in and of themselves. I don't
okay.
mean like a clinical treatment. I mean like
Yeah.
a literary treatment in and of
Yeah.
themselves.
A book.
Um, a book, a book. And for example, people felt like every specific trigger must have a specific solution, which isn't really true. But there were some particular tips for particular triggers, like,
Mm,
what to do if you have trouble eating at night. What do you do if you have trouble
mhm,
during during that time of month? What do you
mm,
do?
mm.
How do you manage emotional triggers? So the first, one of the first books I wrote after Never Binge Again was called 45 Binge Triggers. And we talked about 45 very specific, it's actually 45 binge triggers and what to do to eradicate them, something like that until they go away. Um, just search for 45 binge triggers and you'll find it.
Mhm.
And that was very interesting, particularly the emotional eating part of it. I actually learned a bunch of things researching that book, and we could definitely talk about that because the culture totally misunderstands emotional eating.
Oh, I'm
The,
sure.
the next book was an end to nighttime overeating because we found there was a large contingency of people that couldn't stop eating at night. They would be good all day long and they couldn't stop eating at night. And it turned
Oh,
out they were
wow.
making very common mistakes across that particular subculture, and some things that needed to be fixed there. Um, I wrote a workbook, which was a step-by-step path through the system. So I took, we've coached almost 2,000 people at this point, and I guess
Wow.
by 2019 it was probably 1,000 people, maybe 600. So we took the system that we developed. I say we because I have a partner. We took the system
Uh-huh.
that we developed and we turned it into an algorithm, like a step-by-step algorithm, and we put that in the workbook. It's called I Love My Workbook. Um,
Ah.
and there's an autobiography about how I developed the problem in the first place and what I did about it. And
Mm,
it's called
mm.
Me and My Pig and I. And something we call the food demon interviews, which are really a series of success stories, but it's
Uh-huh.
actual transcripts of coaching sessions and commentary on that. So yeah,
Ah.
read a lot of books.
Wow, wow, that's great. That's great. Excuse me. Yeah, I would let's go back to the first one. I think
The
that's
Binge Trigger book. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, because
Mhm.
that's I think that's something that we're all unique. I mean, I understand that, but there've got to be certain groupings of
Yeah.
of
Well,
things.
well, what if I talked a bit about emotional eating? Because a lot of people are triggered when
Ah,
they feel emotional.
good. That
And
sounds great.
there are different classes of that. There's anxiety, there's anger, there's
Uh-huh.
sadness, there's frustration.
Mm,
Um,
hmm.
but what they all have in common is a misunderstanding of how the relationship works. Most people think I have this emotion and this causes overeating because the emotion is intolerable. Um,
Mm.
and I have to numb out. I have to quote unquote, I am going to quote unquote numb out.
Okay.
And so it's kind of an automatic thing. And you see the classic iconic scenario is the Golden Girls when the Maud or Beverly, what her name is, she says, "I'll get the cheesecake," or Betty, she says, "I'll get the cheesecake," right? Um, and people think that that's how it works, and it's a part of it, but it's
Mm.
far from the whole story. Excuse me. And I always joke with people. I said, if the only reason you were overeating was to numb out, and if overeating was so effective at numbing you out, then when you went to the dentist and they were out of Novocaine, couldn't they just inject you with a bagel and you'd be okay? And people think that's silly, but they remember that.
Yeah.
Um, okay. So first of all, the things we typically overeat on don't only anesthetize the emotional system. It's true that if you overeat, if you overload the digestive system, the nervous
Hmm.
system has difficulty conducting the emotions. So the intensity of emotion
Ah,
does go down initially
okay.
when you overeat.
Okay.
Um, However, the overeating also functions as an operantly conditioned reward for the feeling itself. So if you're someone who feels very anxious in the evening and feels like they can't get to bed without overeating, you might, your heart rate might be a little bit heightened.
Mm.
Your galvanic skin response might be up a little bit. Maybe your blood pressure is a little raised, your respiration, your perspiration. Those are all
Mm.
manifestations, physical manifestations of anxiety. When we look
Mm.
in animal studies and what happens when we observe groups of animals and then we give them a sugar reward when they have certain physiological experiences, um,
Uh-huh.
those animals learn to demonstrate those physical experiences more often. So a group of baboons that are rewarded with sugar every time they have high blood pressure learns to have high blood pressure all the time, right?
Wow.
And so
Yeah.
what's happening here, you're thinking, feel anxiety, overeat, right? But it's
Hmm.
also overeat, more anxiety. Okay. So it goes down temporarily when you get the food, but just temporarily, you're actually conditioning the anxiety in your body. So we find that people who can't sleep without overeating, they and you have to ask your doctor if it's okay to do this, because I'm not a medical doctor and I'm not your medical doctor in any case.
Right.
Um, but we find that most of the people, the path to recovery goes through a week or two of not being able to sleep. It's almost like you have to say to the pig,
Huh.
okay, you're telling me I won't be able to sleep if I don't have a big plate of spaghetti or something. Well, so I
Uh-huh.
won't sleep. You say, I can't sleep, I won't sleep. And it's about 70% as good to lie still with your eyes closed as it is to sleep anyway. Um,
Uh-huh.
and so
Huh. Oh,
they have
that's
a,
interesting.
they get a few bad nights. But then the reward stops and the brain is set up to conserve energy. So if you're not constantly rewarding it for a particular behavior, that behavior slowly begins to stop. It's like a toddler having a tantrum.
Oh,
If you stop
uh-huh.
paying attention, eventually the tantrum starts to go down. It's hard to get through that period.
Yeah.
Um, so that's a really important thing. The other thing is that there is an intervening variable between the stimulus or the emotional stimulation
Mm.
and the
Hmm.
response of overeating, which is it's a rationalization. we have these things
Okay.
called identities, and we like to see ourselves acting in a consistent way. So if I say I will never have chocolate again on a Wednesday, I don't like to observe myself having chocolate on a Wednesday. It creates a phenomenon that Leon Festinger called cognitive dissonance, like a
Yeah.
psychological
Yeah.
pain. And
Yeah.
so we come up with these rationalizations. Um, a little bit won't hurt. You worked out hard enough. You won't gain weight. Chocolate grows on a cocoa plant and
Yeah.
therefore it's a vegetable.
Yeah.
We come up with these rationalizations and it greases the
Uh-huh.
chute. It's almost like those rational, like if the emotion were a fire and it was living in a fireplace, in a well-contained fireplace, the rationalizations are poking holes in the fireplace so the ashes can get out. And I find that's a helpful
Mm.
analogy because a fire in a well-contained fireplace in the living room is an asset, not a liability, right? People gather around, they hug, they cry, they laugh, they tell memories, they tell stories, and they make memories.
Yeah. 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 They get
It's
warm.
and they get warm.
Yeah.
Your emotions are a valuable asset. It's only when that pathway has been greased, when you've poked holes in the
Hmm.
fireplace with these rationalizations, that
Yeah.
you can get into trouble. So what you want to do is identify all those rationalizations and fix them. You want to prove why
Mm.
each one of them is wrong. I told you why you can't start tomorrow. It's never just a little. People say it's going to be just a little, but it's never just a little. And when the pig says a little won't hurt, you can say, well, a little bit is the difference between who's in charge, me or you. And I want to be the master of my own fate. I don't want to be your BIATCH, right?
Uh-huh.
Um,
Right.
I want to be in charge because I want to make decisions about what's important to me. And nobody's giving me these rules. I'm making my own rules. So if there's something I really want to have that it's not on my plan today, I can change the rules for tomorrow and give myself 24 hours after writing it down and thinking it through before it takes
Mm.
effect. So I make sure that my, pig is not doing it emotionally, whimsically.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
so there's no, you kind of have to tell your pig that there's no emotion you're unwilling to tolerate without binging, that your rules are your rules and that's it,
Um,
right?
uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So there's this kind of complex relationship between emotions and overeating. It's not what people think. I tell people to tell themselves you're getting high with food rather than saying I'm comforting myself. Because if you say, oh, I need comfort food, then your pig is going to
Right.
start crying and saying, I'm hurting. And,
Right. I need
I just
comfort.
need
Right.
food. Yeah, I just need comfort.
Right.
And you're going to feel sorry for it and you're going to do it. Um,
Yeah.
so I ask people to shift their paradigm like that. So that's some kind of elucidation of the confusion about emotional eating in our culture
Mm-hmm.
and how I help people to overcome that. It gets tied into social eating. And
Yeah.
shall I pause first and see if there's anything you want to ask me about emotional eating, or should I move
No,
to?
no, it all made perfect sense. I guess my only question actually that comes up is, um, I'm just thinking back in my own head, back 40 some years ago or more, when I was fat. And I was just trying to think if my and it's really an impossibility to do, which is to think back and think, okay, was that what I was doing? I mean, to me, it just seemed like I was eating all the time.
Mhm.
It wasn't that, oh, this happened and then I ate. It was just I was eating all the time.
Well, there's an automaticity that
Hmm.
develops because the brain is set up to conserve
Okay.
energy. And so
Ah.
if you allow it to,
Uh-huh.
it becomes an automatic behavior. And and these kinds of conversations in your head are what occur when you're trying to change your behavior. If you allow it to become automatic, then people will say, well, I just don't hear the pig. I just kind of, I'm just eating all the time, or I pass a bakery and I go in and I buy stuff and it's just
Hmm.
automatic. But That's the
Hmm.
point, is that you can intervene in the automaticity. You can insert a space between stimulus and response so
Mm.
that you can, pull those levers and uh,
Uh-huh.
choose the kind of food that you want to have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. Um, I just had something else that came up and I can't remember what it was. Oh well, it'll come back to me. Um, it's yeah, so I mean that's fine. What was it you were I
Well,
don't
I
know
was
why
good.
my brain is just not working. My memory is not on, is obviously not open this morning. Um, yeah, you were saying to
About
look at,
social eating.
yeah,
A
yeah,
lot of a lot of people associate emotional eating with social eating because they feel these
okay. Yeah,
interpersonal forces. Um, so they're going to Thanksgiving or Christmas or,
right.
a birthday party or
Yeah.
something like that.
Or the girls go out for lunch or dinner
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
yeah.
Okay. Um, so first of all, I mean, restaurants are another story altogether,
Oh,
but
okay.
people feel a lot of pressure to eat what everybody else is eating. And I want to
Mm,
give you a little tool you can use, a little trick of mine
mm,
that you can use to navigate that situation. It involves understanding the psychology of groups and
mhm,
where it probably came from. So most people think that the pressure to eat what everybody else is eating while you're in a group is just because they don't want to feel guilty about what they're eating. They want to eat what tastes good to them, right? And as a consequence, we all tacitly agree to slowly kill ourselves with food and joke it off, right? Like, let's go get the cheesecake, right? Ha ha ha. And in the meantime, um, diabetes is up by 80% and kidney disease is almost double and
mm.
cardiovascular disease is like tripled in the last 30 years or something. Um,
Wow.
don't quote me on those stats. Just look at the World Health Organization. It's really bad.
Yeah.
Um, the um, the pressure to eat what everybody else eats in a group probably originally comes from the fact that in our early evolution, food was not really very abundant and infinitely available like it is today.
Mm,
It was
mm,
likely that when there was a catch or a harvest, that only one thing was available. It was also probably likely that every member's labor of the tribe was necessary for survival, and that if someone were to become feeble or sick, that they would be a burden on the tribe and put the tribe at risk. So it really was a matter of survival that you eat what everyone else was eating. And then when two warring tribes would try to make peace, they would break bread together. They would eat together to demonstrate that they're not there to maim, kill, mutilate, rape, you know,
I, yeah.
and that that they're actually friends and safe
Hmm.
allies now.
Hmm.
And so there's this, I believe, there is this underlying feeling, even though it's not rational in today's world, it's
Hmm.
really only 100,000 years or so ago that life was like that, which is a blip on the scale of evolution. Uh, we have these very hardwired feelings that we're supposed to eat what everybody else is eating, or else we're putting the tribe at
Mm,
risk. It's a matter of
mm,
survival. It's not
hmm.
just for
Hmm.
indulgence and taste. Okay. Then the other force and I'm telling you all this so you don't go into battle wearing a plastic helmet. Um,
Yeah.
the other force at play is the necessity of group cohesion. Um,
Oh,
in group psychology, there's a difference between an aggregate, which is just an unorganized group of people, and a
mm,
group, which has a set of norms and values and ways that we should live together. Think
mhm,
about walking into an elevator. If I walked into an elevator today, even before the pandemic, um, and there are 10 people in the elevator, we're all as far apart as we can, not looking at each other, staring up at the screen, not having much to do with each other, trying to write out the ordeal, right? God forbid
yeah.
someone says good morning or anything like that. That's an aggregate, right?
Uh-huh.
Um, it wouldn't make any sense when I got to my floor for me to turn to everybody and say, "This was great. Let's do it again next year." That wouldn't make any sense. However, if I get stuck in the elevator with those people for 3 hours in between floors, by the time the repairmen come to open up the elevator and rescue us, we've probably developed a bunch of routines together. First of all, maybe we're playing cards, or at least sitting in a circle and joking around. Maybe we have a norm for how often it's okay to press the call button. What do we do when one of us has to go to the bathroom? Is there a way that we talk each other down? Maybe there's a song that we're singing. It's become
Yeah.
a group. We've had an experience. We have an
Yeah.
identity as a group. Okay. Um, that experience, that quality of groupness, of group cohesion,
Hmm.
it it fades as time passes when the group is not together.
Hmm.
And so let's say you go into your families for Thanksgiving, but you haven't seen them for a couple of months. The group is going to make an effort to recohere the group. Part of that effort is to make a love offering. Often that's in the form
Mm.
of food. Mom comes running up and says, "Oh, you look so thin. Darling, I made your favorite chocolate chip cake. Here, a little's not going to hurt you." Right? Now, what most people do will say, "Well, Mom, I can't have chocolate. My doctor says it's not good for me," or "I'm really trying to get down." No, the problem is that there are two things that occur there. First of all, you're not allowing the group cohesion to take place, right?
Hmm.
So you're kind of rejecting her, and there's this unconscious fear that the group is going to fall apart. Even if you've been a
Hmm.
family for 20 years or whatever, it's still kind
Yeah.
of built into our DNA, the group is going to fall apart. And the second thing is now mom feels guilty. Maybe she shouldn't have made it for you. Maybe she shouldn't be eating this
Yeah.
herself, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a real problem. It's a real problem.
Hmm.
What I
Yeah.
suggest you do instead there is called the alternative love gift technique, where you redirect mom to love you in a different way. And it could be something like, you know what, Mom, I'm so cold. You happen to have a sweater I could wear. I'm
Uh-huh.
just so cold. It's just, oh, of course, darling, here, let me take care of you. She's loving you back into the group. Mom,
Yeah.
I ate a little too much at lunch. Do you have any mint tea? Could you make me some mint tea? You know that mint tea you used to make? I would love
Yeah.
that. Oh, of course, darling, I'll do that. It could even be
Uh-huh.
information. Mom, I couldn't get an internet connection in the car. I'm dying to know what the score of the game is. Do you think I could look at the TV for a second? Any of the above, you give her
Yeah.
something else she can give you to love you back into the
Hmm.
tribe, and
Yeah.
then the
Yeah.
conversation about food, it moves to the side. It's I've developed a
Interesting.
bunch of different ways to try to do this over the years, but this is the best one. So yeah, that's a little tip for managing the social environment.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's really that goes for even having nothing to do with being on a diet or watching your meals or whatever. I mean, it could just be you don't like what they are offering,
Hmm.
right? And so you can just kind of say, yeah, that not really in the mood for that, but gee, if you have this, that would be really great. If
Hmm.
you have this in the refrigerator,
Absolutely.
um, you
Absolutely.
know,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, because that's really just when you were talking about it, I could see that happening whether it's people being on a diet or not. I mean, there's so many people have such different food likes and dislikes these
Hmm.
days,
Hmm.
and well, they always have, but and allergies, and there's so many other reasons that could come up,
All of
and
the above.
that's such a great trick to know. Yeah.
The last major book
Okay.
that you want to
Yeah.
stop. You want to stop there?
No, 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 no. That's okay. I was gonna say, go on, go on.
Well, the last major book I'll talk about before we go is
Uh-huh.
an end to nighttime overeating. An end to nighttime
Mm,
overeating. Um, this was the last major problem that we had to solve. We get very good results with our binge coaching
okay.
programming. 90% reduction in the first month.
Wow.
We do really, really well for people that engage with the program and talk to their
Yeah.
coach and everything like that. Um, what What we found, though, was that the people who were overeating at night did significantly worse. We just couldn't seem to solve that. And so I hired some researchers to look into the literature on nighttime overeating. We did
Mm,
a big survey. We interviewed a whole bunch of people, and we found a bunch of really interesting things. First of
okay.
all, just about everybody who had overcome nighttime overeating was someone who was eating breakfast late in the day. They were
Oh,
trying to not really have breakfast at all or not start until like 11 o'clock.
oh, okay.
They would often say, they were kind of focusing intermittent fasting, and which is, beneficial in and of itself. But
Right.
if you're struggling with binging at night, it's not really going to help you.
No.
And so we'd recommend that people take a period of time where they have breakfast earlier. It seems
Uh-huh.
like when the brain perceives the nighttime fast is going to be long, it signals you that you really better get some food in at night before you go to bed. And so
Oh,
when you
okay.
know that the nighttime fast is not going to be quite as long, then you stop overeating or as much at night. We
Uh-huh.
also found that the people who overcame nighttime overeating were adding crunch to their lunch, some type of carrots or celery or
Uh-huh.
apples or something
Uh-huh.
that actually, you call it a hard chew. Um,
Uh-huh.
and we don't really know why this is. We just know that it is. So we tell people to add crunch to their lunch. My hypothesis is that there's a certain amount of oral aggression that we're built to get out of us by chewing. And like and
Oh,
where primates were supposed to have vegetation, and
okay.
vegetating
Yeah.
requires chewing. And if you're not really doing that during the day, then we think there's an instinctual need that is still pressing for discharge in the evening. So that
Ah,
was really interesting. Um,
yeah.
and then we found that the people that overcame nighttime overeating, they had nighttime rituals.
Mm.
So we joke that they could call their inner pig Pigula, because it was like Dracula that started whispering, and they had to have rituals that kept the vampire out of the house.
Uh-huh.
So part of that involved knowing when dinner was over, very specifically. Some
Mhm.
people would clap their hands 3 times and go, kitchen's closed, right? Other people would go brush their teeth, change their clothes, take off their makeup, and go to another part of the house.
Uh-huh.
One woman, as soon as the dishes were in the dishwasher, she'd go, dinner and done, and she'd smack the dishwasher closed. There was a very discrete point. And
Okay.
if you think about the vampire movies, you know exactly when the sun's gone down, right? You know
Uh-huh.
that. And so it's kind of the same thing. You have to behave differently after the sun goes down. And in
Mm.
order to do that, you have to know when the sun goes down. Then they would have very particular rules for themselves about what happened after the sun went down. So sometimes that would be like, I'll never have anything after dinner except for, tea and warm tofu or, whatever, or, steamed vegetables, whatever you wanted to have afterwards, to have
Hmm.
this, period of decompression when were very specific things allowed or not allowed. Um,
Mm-hmm.
they didn't eat in bed. They would not allow themselves to eat in bed at all. They kept bed for,
Mm-hmm.
intimacy, sleep, reading. Um, and that's about it. That's the primary protocol we discovered to overcome nighttime overeating. There's
Uh-huh.
more to it in detail, but
Yeah.
that's the last book that I wrote. So
Okay. Yeah. And all of that makes perfect sense. Um, and I'm sure that as you kind of alluded to earlier, everybody's got their own ones of these things that
mhm,
they do,
mhm.
right? Or don't do. Not everybody eats at night. Not everybody. I mean, it's a larger number, I'm sure, but
Everybody
um,
has a very unique overeating profile.
right.
And so
Yeah.
everybody needs a unique set of customized rules
Yeah.
to make it work for them. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, how it's so fascinating. Um, yeah, I don't, it's funny because I don't, I mean, I'm sure I do things like that now. I'm not overeating, but it's trying to think back to when I was fat, because I was. Um, I don't remember. I don't, but it was a long time ago, and I'm sure that's why I don't remember.
I got
You
you.
know, yeah.
Would it be okay if I reminded people where they can get a free copy of the main book?
Yes, please. Yes,
Okay.
yes. That
Uh,
was going to be my
yeah.
next. Yeah.
Okay. So you can get a free copy of neverbingeagain.com
Uh-huh.
you can get a free copy of Never Binge Again in Kindle, Nook, or PDF format at
Uh-huh.
neverbingeagain.com if you click the big red button and sign up for the reader bonuses, where you'll also get a set of food plan starter templates and customized set of rules for any dietary philosophy, point counting, calorie counting, ketogenic, high
Ah,
carb, low carb,
uh-huh.
um,
Okay.
and a set of recorded coaching sessions so you can see how this actually works in practice. The
Ah, interesting.
the other books are available at neverbingeagainbooks.com. All these other books that we
Oh,
talked about
okay.
are at neverbingeagainbooks.com.
Uh-huh.
So,
Okay. Okay. Good. Very good. Yeah. Yeah. As I'm sure you have found out from being in this area for so long, that it really is something that probably most people have come up against at some point.
mhm.
Um, you know, and some I, how many people is it that are successful and then relapse?
I don't like the word relapse because I don't think it's a
Okay.
disease. But
Yeah, no, okay, sorry. I didn't mean it. Yeah, I was just thinking go backwards, but yeah.
people that reverse their
Yeah.
previously held best
Mm-hmm.
intentions. Um,
Mm-hmm.
we don't know 100%. I can tell you
Uh-huh.
that after a month, people that are engaged with us, they report they're doing 90% better.
Uh-huh.
At around the 6 month mark, that number is more like in the 55 to 60% range.
Okay.
Around the
Interesting.
year, it's like a little under 50%. So, I mean, I think that's better than most programs, but
Yeah.
a lot of people still go back to, you can't, there is no treatment for free will. And if you want to overeat, you can
That's
overeat.
true.
But the good thing is that if you can choose to overeat, you can also choose not to overeat.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
stop looking for someone to do something to you or give you a pill or do some surgery and
Right.
do the mental work that's necessary to build
Yeah.
the fortitude and stamina to get through this.
Absolutely. 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 And to, and it's like so many other things, people can be doing it well for 10 or 20 years and then something will happen in their lives
Mhm.
and they may stay with it and they may not.
Right.
It's yes, it's so much fun being a human being. But it's better than the alternative.
Yeah. Susan, I have another call in a couple of minutes. Is there anything
Yes,
else you
that's
wanted to
fine.
ask or tell me?
No, no, no. That's it. That's it. We went a little longer than I had planned,
Okay.
but that's what happens. So thank you so much for coming back on. And I will just say what I always have to say at the end, which is that this is not to be seen as medical advice,
Right.
and neither of us are medical doctors. And if you are having um, medical problems, please go and see your doctor or whoever it is you deal with. And with that, I will say goodbye and I will see everybody next week.
Okay. Thank you so much.